I think this is my sixth podcast in the last 3 days.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of file processing for you over the past few days, and it's not a problem, but it's just kind of like, Awesome's doing a lot.
I hope people like the sound in my voice. I've gotten voice compliments, but you always gotta keep in mind that you're always annoying to someone, just because of the law of large numbers, right? There's 8 billion people.
Oh gosh, yeah. I was chatting with some folks, and I always get, it always gets a little like blush-inducing when someone's like, "Oh man, Skitch, you got like a great radio voice." I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, now you have deep, sultry tones that we all enjoy. My voice keeps getting higher. I think the more I podcast, it keeps getting more reedy and annoying.
There'll be a point where Discord listens to your regular speaking voice and decides, nope, we're going to mute this like we mute all your like baby voice characters, and refuse to let people hear it.
Yeah, the end point of my career is only dogs can hear me podcast, and that's
Right.
really what I've been going for the whole time. That's the only people who I care about their opinion.
Podcasting for dogs, like the D&D podcast for dogs, is an interesting premise, you know.
Yeah, D&D stands for dogs and dogs. My audience.
But yeah, so another instance of us reviewing some tabletop shenanigans here, it looks like. And I'm just going to warn everyone, we are not going to go through the entirety of the 2024 PHB in this. There's too much stuff in here to go over, and, you know, maybe we could do a follow-up thing down the line, but there's just a lot of tedious details we could get crunchy into, so I think we got other goals for what we're going to do today when talking about this book and what it means there. So
Yeah, what, 384 pages?
yeah, and, you know, one of the things I saw as a note from somewhere was that like the fact that like artificers aren't like in this book, and that's, and one of the points that someone made was that if they wanted to have artificers in this book, they probably would have had to have an extended area of magic items in this book as well for the artificers to tap into, and that would have made the book even longer. And I think the added thing with artificers, of course, is just the fact that the license over who owns it, whether it's like Baker or WotC or otherwise, I believe it's a WotC owned thing. They do at least reference it still kind of as like expanded content if you're making a character on D&D Beyond. But let's get to like what's all here. You know, this is effectively D&D 5.5. I think a lot of people have sort of made that claim. And while WotC has tried to make efforts to sort of tamp down that type of comparison, it's really hard not to look at this as anything but like a revised version of 5th edition with a lot of features, some of which I think are strictly better, some of which are side grades, and honestly a small amount that I think are kind of like downgrades from a writing, reading, and playing experience. So we'll try to get through what we can.
So Wizards of the Coast, WotC, is kind of a victim of its own success.
Yes.
Basically 10 years of 5th edition being a cultural phenomenon, you know, getting everything from Critical Role and Adventure Zone to the Chris Pine theatrical film. Like, they're on top of the world. But now, how do you get people to buy a new product? That's the question. Are they still using the one D&D branding? That seemed like it was going to be a thing, but I don't see that anywhere in the book.
No, they kind of dropped that, I think, partially because one D&D kind of got soured by the OGL controversy that was going around. By the time the book came out, it is just simply called Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook, and on D&D Beyond, it's referred to as D&D 2024. A small other additional controversy, which did not help WotC, was there was a period leading up to the early access release on Beyond where they were basically indicating that they were going to like remove 2014 versions of spells and magic items from the site. And then after enough pushback from the community, they've now kept all that on there and just have it underneath the legacy banner on there. So you can basically make a 2014 version of a character or 2024. And for 2024 characters, there are some materials in that interim between 2014 and 2024 you can tap into. So like you could pick a Tasha's Cauldron of Everything subclass for your 2024 character, and it will just plug in there.
Yeah, they can't go a month without stepping on their own dicks in one way or another.
I mean, like, it's so funny because the controversies for WotC related to D&D are so different than the Magic the Gathering side, and it's really interesting seeing like what they kind of step on and then what they try to deal with around that. It feels very fascinating for being two different sides of the same company having very different interactions with your audiences.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a fun contrast because they seem similar. They're both like high fantasy products that have like these long legacies, but they could not be more different in the economic models where you get the cheapest cardboard they can get from like Eastern Europe. People will buy for hundreds of dollars. It's like, it's just a license to fill warehouses full of cash. And D&D is like, we have to sell these expensive, heavy ass books that can easily be scanned and pirated. Like someone on a Discord can just tell you what the spell does. You know, you don't need, it's like so hard to monetize. So
absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's kind of part of what makes the tabletop scene like kind of difficult, because up until 5th edition, I don't think WotC had a situation where D&D had this degree of popularity, to the point that, like, even beyond the examples you listed, you also had, like, the Strangers thing bit. You had all these different partnerships, even, like, Rick and Morty and stuff like that. And it's a difficult thing because one other facet that makes Dungeons & Dragons very different from Magic the Gathering is that a central experience about D&D, due to the community elements and the multiplayer thing, is the homebrewing scene. And, you know, it's like, how do you make a game that allows for a high degree of community content be added into it? Because you can't really do that with Magic the Gathering. Like, you don't go to, like, your local commander session and see everyone's, like, fully homebrewed commander decks, you know?
Yeah, my commander is Austin Yorsky. He's a one-mana 15/15. Eat my dick.
No, eat my dick is the flavor text on the commander there.
That's all it says.
That's all it says. It doesn't even attribute it to anyone there. But, like, so when it comes to doing a new edition of D&D, traditionally, when it came to like 1 to 2 to 3/3.5 to 4 to 5, each edition basically engages in a pretty dramatic paradigm shift where there's changes in how fundamental rules work. Like an example from 2 to 3 was the addition of skills as a concept, as opposed to non-weapon proficiencies, having skill ranks that you can put into and stuff, along with other things like removing racial restrictions for classes, removing making multi-classing being something you pick up as you level up over time, adding prestige classes. Then 4th edition comes by, they convert all the different abilities into powers like little cards, and makes the experience of building a character almost like building a Magic the Gathering deck. And then 5th edition comes around and they try to do this sort of reversal, make it more 3rd edition. And with this edition, one thing I can kind of say is an interesting takeaway is that it feels a little bit like a halfway point between 5th edition and 4th edition in some interesting ways.
Oh, that's curious. I will say that I think you're the expert here. I think you've been keeping up with development more, and you probably got a deeper reading of the text. I have read the book, but I'm gonna be playing like the idiot who's like, "Can you explain this to me?" That's like my role in this podcast, because it's our disparity is, I think, going to be pretty evident. But also, as I said, a victim of their own popularity. There is nothing they can publish that won't immediately be torn to shreds by a million nerds. There is a whole cottage industry. Anytime something happens with this brand, is people will make YouTube videos, they'll write essays, they'll do news articles. Like, this stuff is being picked apart everywhere. So I don't think you're coming to us for, like, you know, something that only we have noticed. It's more just like, what do we think?
There's no way that anything that we're going to say has not been already outlined in an article, in someone else's deep dive videos and stuff like that. I think part of what we're going to be talking about is kind of like our perspective from the context of Dice Funk, and as well as just sort of like, just, you know, our own flavor and twist on stuff. So in terms of the book itself, I actually want to start off by something I found interesting about the book's structure, and that makes it dramatically different from 2014 5e, and that is how long Chapter 1 playing the game is. For a point of comparison, in 5th edition, if I were to reference my information on that book there, I believe that you end up talking about, they talk about like how to play the game for like 1 page or 2, and by page 11 you're into character information. Like, it's very, very brief opening there. It's, you know, there's not really much in terms of like examples of how play works and stuff like that. There's a brief bit of that, but it's not like extensive. By comparison, 2024 opens up with like what? I think it's, oh geez, try to remember how long it is. It's like over 20 pages of just explaining what playing D&D is like, going over rules regarding how to roll the dice, how table interactions work, going over combat rules in some degree of detail, even before you even see what the rules are for creating a character. And there are some little nuggets of information in there that I find to be actually indicative of the more contemporary writing that's going into the game. These are things that you see in other games being made where there's more extensive play examples, like what we talked about with the Final Fantasy XIV tabletop, where there's like a pretty long explanation of what play is like. And on beyond that, going into little like side notes, like one of my favorite sides that was pretty interesting was talking about party composition. And hey, here are options you can get into if you want to swap out having a fighter in the party. You could have a monk or a ranger instead, and that can act as the fighter for your party from a balance standpoint and things like that.
You would think that with this revision and with this game at the height of its popularity, it would be the other direction. Like, they'd be paring away the introductory stuff. Do you like add more subclasses and more spells or whatever? So it is curious to me that, yeah, the creating a character doesn't start until page 32.
Yeah.
And on the first page, welcome to the adventure. In the bottom right corner, there's a box that says learn by watching, which I don't know why they don't name drop any series in particular. Maybe if someone gets extremely canceled, they don't want that in their book. But great way to learn the basics of D&D is to watch people play it. The internet, capital I, offers videos of D&D. Yeah, it sure does. There's a lot of D&D on there. But I don't remember that in previous books, but you'd think that's where it would have been.
Yeah, I think that's a fine observation they make. One of the bigger, there's a couple of big changes they made kind of up front that you may not realize are pretty dramatic changes unless you kind of really compare the text. So I think the biggest one is the fact that they've sort of streamlined some of the terminology in the game and codified it more so. And this is what I mean by this is kind of more of a 4th edition thing. Like, in 5th edition, they focused heavily on a lot of natural language, whereas in here, they're not as afraid to lean into some more keywording and stuff. So, for example, they introduce in the playing the game section the idea of the D20 test. So just basically, anytime you roll a D20, it's called a D20 test. And then here's the subtypes. You can have an ability check, a saving throw, and an attack roll. But by doing that in conjunction with the rules glossary that they have at the back of the book, it makes it easier to have like a more consolidated set of rules that are easier to understand with less ambiguity up front. And that's always a good thing to have.
Yeah, I feel like some of this stuff could just be on their website or whatever. It's like, what is the product you're selling?
Yeah.
Like, this is, maybe I'm missing something, but I definitely would have preferred, like we already set up, the artificer class being in here rather than 30 pages of what is D&D.
Well, I mean, and the thing is, though, like, this is kind of the challenge when it comes to physical books. As someone who's dealt with that sort of area, the rule of thumb when it comes to making the book itself is that ideally you want to have it so that the book contains everything that is needed within itself to teach somebody how to play the game and onboard them, and then go into as much detail about the other information as possible. And this is a better approach to it than what 5th edition did, which was written almost too much like you're coming in here as someone who's played 3rd edition already, so you kind of already know what you're doing, and here we go, right?
Sure. Do you think, I mean, I know you don't have access to these metrics, but do you think that this is going to be a big onboarding point, or is the market like a lot of people like us who are just like, I wish they would move things around a little bit?
I think whether this ends up being an onboarding thing or not is definitely up for debate. I think that they still kind of needed to have some of this because there are some changes that people may not realize unless they read through this stuff in detail. I'll throw one of the big changes that people may not realize, and that's how inspiration works. That's one of those changes that, like, if you don't really read it, you may not realize that it's dramatically different than 5th edition inspiration was. So in 5th edition, inspiration was whenever you got it, you could just burn it to get advantage on a roll. In 2024, it's called heroic inspiration. And the way that it works is that when you roll, you can look at the result, use heroic inspiration, and then re-roll it and take the new result instead.
Yeah, that seems to be a design kind of philosophy that is repeated throughout. I think the Bardic Inspiration also works that way.
Bardic Inspiration, yes, is also a thing you tap after a roll. And I think the big reason why they wanted to go around this way was to make Heroic Inspiration a thing that is more rapidly given out to people by making it less potent, by making it not just advantage. To make a point of this, there's actually a fighter subclass that basically has a level text, the champion, where at one of its levels, if you start your turn without Heroic Inspiration, you just get it automatically. So you have it every single turn, theoretically, but you can't crit fish with it. But what you can do is like, oh, that attack is a miss. I'm going to re-roll. Cool, it's a hit. And that, I think, allows them a little bit more play in that territory there, which is like, that's fine. I'm not really like upset either way about that sort of choice.
I think it's more natural. I think a lot of people want to use it that way anyway, and you kind of fight the natural inclinations of players when you do it the other way. People don't like to risk consumable resources.
Right, and using it in a situation where it could be wasted. Like, at least in this situation, you're always using it when there's a chance that it'll be relevant, as opposed to you burn inspiration and got advantage and like, oh no, I just rolled a 19 and a 20. Okay, fine. But there's other little details in this playing the game chapter I find neat. There's a little bit more stuff that would be found in the DMG in 2014 that is in here telling the players that this is stuff that they can be aware of. Like, there's a sidebar on skill checks, and it points out how you might do a skill check with a different ability score, and here's how that works. You know, you do a strength, if you're doing intimidation, you might do it with charisma normally, or you might be in a situation where you're doing it with strength. In this case, you roll strength and add proficiency bonus. And it's just like easy, great. It's good that it's just like right down there and it's outlined. Another notable change to the outline is the codification of a lot more specific action terms. So in addition to things like attack, dodge, disengage, and dash, they now have the actions magic, which is when you're using a magic item or spell, search or study, which are basically wisdom or intelligence checks, utilizing to use in a non-magical object, hide, which has more codified rules, and one that's pretty interesting, which is influence, which I find the influences rules interesting because it really models how you've been running influencing as a matter of course in the podcast, Austin.
Oh yeah, can you drill down on that? Because
absolutely,
I feel like a lot of these things are kind of them just putting in writing what people do anyway.
Well, yeah, in this case here, the influence rules were part of the DMG more or less in some capacity. But this case, since they're in the player's handbook, the players have a better understanding of some of the terms. So influence works under the following ways. When you interact with someone, they can be friendly, indifferent, or hostile. And that determines whether you have advantage, no difference, or disadvantage on an influence check. When you try to influence somebody, their temperament, whether they're willing, unwilling, or hesitant, determines how successful the check could be. So it even outlines here, if you're trying to influence someone who is willing to do what you're asking it to do, you do not need to make a check. If you are dealing with a dog and you want it to get a bone out of your hand, it's going to go for it because it aligns with its desires. Whereas if you're trying to urge somebody to do something that is counter to its alignment or counter to its sort of like what it wants to do. And if it's unwilling, you can't convince them just by doing influence. And if they're hesitant, then you have different checks you can do, and that can kind of change their temperament one way or another. So like, I remember there being times when we're talking and interacting with people, trying to influence them, it's not like 3rd edition diplomancy where you just score high enough that someone just becomes your devoted follower. It's more like, if someone is willing to be persuaded, you can kind of nudge them a little bit with a successful influence attempt.
Yeah, some people treat like persuasion skill checks like mind control.
Correct.
Where someone will just abandon all their lifelong ambitions and dreams because you rolled once.
Right. And I think that's kind of like having that stuff codified and outlined early on in the books is nice. It also does they also do one other detail I found to be a really nice touch, which is they address one of my big complaints from 5th edition, which is if you have a tool proficiency and a skill check that you also have proficiency with, and you're trying to do both at the same time. In 5th edition, the result was like, shrug, okay. Now it's like, if you're trying to do a skill check that you're proficiency with a tool you're proficient with, you get advantage on the check.
Yep, that makes sense.
You know, you don't get expert. Yeah, it's just like, it's one of those things that's like you said, it's kind of an obvious choice. It's like... It's like, did it take him 10 years to figure this out? Probably not. But it was one of those things like, okay, it's good that it's at least in the PHB. It's outlined very cleanly, so it just kind of outlines. I mean, here's a big detail for me. The fact that they define bonus actions before you see classes that have them is a huge gain for me compared to 5th edition, where you'd see all these bonus actions from monks, then had to go all the way to the combat section to find out that, oops, you can only have one bonus action per turn. And that's never defined anywhere in the character section, right? So the fact that they have these things outlined again are, strictly speaking, good. It makes this a stronger reference text. And for the handful of people that are being onboarded into D&D, it means like, hey, you can read these 20-ish pages and know everything you need to know on a basic level to engage with D&D, including good example sessions. And the example play sessions they have sidebars to explain different styles of role play, what is considered an ability check versus an influence action, and stuff like that. So all those are details where I'm like, cool, nice, great.
A thing that immediately jumps out to me is the art in this section.
Yeah.
I don't know how close an eye you keep on this stuff, but they have done a different art style for when they show humans playing the D&D versus the in-universe like monsters and stuff. I don't know if they hired the same artist for all of them, but they're very cohesive.
Yeah.
And it stands out to me. I don't remember anything like this in previous books.
Yeah. I think it does a good job of... They've done the art direction for this book is actually very strong. One of my favorite details they did, which is actually something that reminds me of Pathfinder 2nd edition and Starfinder, is when we start talking about the character classes, they have not only an iconic representative of the class up front, they also have representatives of each of the subclasses with a little bit of art. So everything gets kind of like equal visual treatment, whereas there were stretches of the old PHB where like the representation of different classes varied because you either had so many subclasses for the cleric and wizard, or you just had other things where there just wasn't as much art to kind of help inspire somebody into what the thing's going to feel like to play.
Yeah, that's definitely good. I should say I'm going to have more art notes, but one thing I noticed in the class section, as you're stating, is that there are two pieces of art, from the rogue and the sorcerer, which depict Magic the Gathering art, Curdle of Baldur's Gate, and Delino Wildmage. Those cards are reused. I know this is a Psychosis, pretty unique to me, but it's immediately jumped out that they reused that art. And the Curdle one in particular has been like color graded very strangely. I don't know if that was on purpose or what, but it really jumped out. There's also late in the book a reuse of a druid art. It's the guy and his bear from the original Player's Handbook. Those are the only ones that really stuck out to me. All the other stuff is new and good, I think.
Yeah, and I think they did a pretty good job, like I said, with how the different arts and the stuff kind of make the different subclasses feel like dynamic and dramatic. And I think that really helps get people kind of like mentally primed. And that kind of leads to another thing about how they structure the book differently. In 5th edition, the first thing they had you do when it came to building a character was pick your character race. That was the first thing they had you do. And then you would go through and then pick your class and stuff like that. Whereas in this version, this literally just says you start by picking your class, building out your origin, which is background plus species, then do your ability scores, and then do the rest from there. And I think that does flow better for how most people are going to be approaching the game. They're going to look at the classes, get an idea of how they want to interact with the world, and then fill out the details further from there.
This is one of those things where human psychology is actually maybe more important in some aspects than quote unquote good game design.
Yeah.
Because I think it totally makes sense to start with what used to be called race and which is now called species. We'll get to, because you are an elf before you're a fighter. Like you're a baby, and like that you're going through the flow chart of like who your guy is. That totally makes sense. But in practice, what you're going to be doing is playing your class 95% of the time.
Correct.
So I totally get that. I mean, that's usually where I start with people. I'm like, what do you want to do? Do you want to throw fireballs? Do you want to have a bow and arrow? You know, like makes sense.
It's also interesting because in the front end, when they tell you about picking a class, they have this little class overview table. So it has each class, it lists what do they like, it lists their primary ability scores, and then lists complexity. And I find it a little silly in some respect because like complexity can vary from player to player. There are only 2 low complexity classes they have, which are fighter and rogue. And then the high complexity ones were bard, druid, monk, sorcerer, and warlock. And then the remaining barbarian, cleric, paladin, ranger, and wizard are listed as average complexity, which I find to be interesting as choices there.
Yeah, I mean, we could quibble with it. I found Barbarian extremely simple, but I don't know. Maybe they've made a couple tweaks there I didn't fully internalize. Also, I feel like Rogue is something that trips people up a lot because they think sneak attack, you need to be sneaking. I don't know, but I've just played with some weirdos, maybe.
Barbarian, I think, is more complex in this version than it was in 5e. And broadly, Barbarian is one of the classes that I'm really happy with the changes, because it becomes way more team focused and support focused in many ways. I think is really interesting. But we could dive more to that as we get further into like specifics and stuff like that. Another big detail of big change, this is something that's not new for a lot of folks who've been following here, is that they've got rid of a lot of like almost like the racial essentialism type things there. The race where like before your race basically determined a lot of things, including what your stats were going to be and otherwise. They've decoupled that entirely, and they've also departed from the term race. So now you have species, and then you have background, and the backgrounds determine what your ability scores are, and it gives you a free level 1 feat.
This is like the meat of the differences for a lot of people. Like we could probably just do a podcast just on this.
Yeah.
I think you can go back to like season 1 of Dice Funk and hear me say I'm uncomfortable with the terminology of race.
Yeah.
And I'm almost certain I've explicitly said I prefer species, although even that is not contested. I know a lot of people say they wish they had used lineage.
Yep.
And there's other, options out there. I don't know if there's a correct one, but race was, I think, pretty incorrect.
Yeah, like, there's ancestry, which is what Pathfinder is. When in the games I've done some playtesting work on, legacy is one there, lineage, origin. There's lots of different terms for it, and they use origin as the encapsulating thing for, where did you come from and who are your parents. When it comes to the species options, there are some changes in here. Namely, the half races are gone, the half species. There's no half elf, no half orc, though you can still technically play as one just by mixing between things. But they've added Aasimar and Goliath as PHB selections for species.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I was trying to see what you actually get for your species, which they have really peeled back on. And as far as I can tell, Goliath is the only one with a different speed than 30, which I think everyone else has.
Correct.
So they're pretty similar.
Yeah, the differences are not as dramatic, but they still get like they still have some of their nice little things that kind of distinguish them. Like halflings still have luck, as they should, because that's fine. Aasimar still operates kind of similar to how it has had in the past. One of the things that's a small detail is that you don't get languages from your species. You get a language selection from your background, and certain classes give you extra languages, but you don't get a language from your species, which I think for some people is a verisimilitude break, but I don't think it's that difficult to just ad hoc that in as a GM player.
I don't know if we have any linguists listening, but they're chuckling to themselves at the idea that language has anything to do with biology or that a species would have one language. It's truly preposterous.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Like that's what, like, I understand why they decoupled it, because it, like you said, like the fact that you're an elf does not necessarily, you know, the fact that we're humans doesn't mean that we speak a specific language. Where we grow up tells us that. And so that ties well with the idea that your background gives you your language rather than your genetics. And
yeah,
you know, that's fine. Like I'm with you. I don't think it's a problem from my mind. There's just a handful of people who might have this particular legacy D&D verisimilitude, or just like, well, you know, I'm playing a tiefling, I should know Infernal. It's like, oh, okay, sure. If
you can,
there's ways to do that, but also if the GM says cool, then fine, whatever. So
yeah, I mean, remember that all of this is an abstraction, right? Like, you can kind of do whatever you want unless your DM is like a real dick, because we're not modeling every single thing. What if your character just has a heart attack and dies? No saves, fuck you. Shit happens.
I will say one thing I find kind of fascinating about the way that they've set up the backgrounds and the way they've done their origin feats is that this is jumping ahead a little bit here, but every feat, aside from origin feats and fighting style feats, come with ability score advancements. All the origin feats are just, here's some extra features, you do not get any stats from them, and then other feats will give you a stat plus something else. And looking at the origin feats, some of them actually are a little bit more interesting than I thought. Like, here's a neat detail, the musician feat. You get proficiency with 3 musical instruments, and after a short or long rest, you can play music and give heroic inspiration to your allies, but like at the end of a short rest. So it's almost like a bardic song of rest type like benefit, but anyone who has the musician origin feat can do it. So like, hey, not bad. It's not going to be like the most game breaking feature, but like, hey, it's pretty cool.
The whole idea of feats was a pretty fraught one in 5th edition as published. Like, it didn't really cleanly work. I basically started giving them out like on a whim during the season, just because there was rarely a time when taking them yourselves was correct or, you know, optimal. So seeing them more integrated here is interesting. I definitely could see you leaning more in that direction. One thing we've been talking about for Dice Funk as a show is, like, I think Quinn asked me last night, are we using the new book for season 12? And I don't know if that's the right question, because it's not a different game.
Right.
But what I would say is if you make your character using either the 2014 or the 2024 stuff, but then probably stick to that. Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Because I think it would be kind of confusing if you built like a 2014 barbarian and then tried to use like a 2014 wizard and then try to do like the 2024 spells, because they've shifted some stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that being said, though, like when we get to talk about some of the classes in particular, like it might be more of the case where you're doing like a 2024 character, but then you're pulling like, let's say, feats or other elements from the 14 era of the game to kind of flesh things out there. But, you know, most characters, I would say, broadly either got a side grade or an upgrade in how they operate in this game, with a handful of like niche exceptions. And then there's the Ranger, which is his own sort of weird territory there.
Yeah, well, I think we'll probably go class by class or nearly so.
Pretty
but
much, yeah.
Let's finish talking about the background stuff because I have tried to teach a lot of people this game over the last 10 years.
Yep.
And almost universally, like my friend group, everyone is like a college graduate. Some have like master's degrees, and
Yep.
they are fucking baffled by backgrounds. I don't know why.
Yeah.
It just does whatever that was up with that old book. People didn't get it, and
Yeah.
I think they had to do something, and they really have. Backgrounds are now super important. You
Yep.
can't ignore them. So I don't know if you want to speak to that. But.
Sure, yeah. So to kind of speak to your point, in 14, one of the things they tried to do with backgrounds was something that I felt was kind of emblematic of like other games. When your character has like wants and needs and flaws, and you play into those to create narrative moment. In fact, one could argue that the way the flaws were meant to work with 14 era backgrounds, if you played into your flaw and created a complication, that would be the basis to get inspiration. However, like you said, most people just did not pay attention to the backgrounds because all backgrounds was a way to get some skill proficiencies or tool proficiencies. Now, backgrounds give you the following things. They give you your 3 different ability scores. You can advance either all by 1 or 1 by 2, the other by 1. So if you pick the Acolyte, you can increase intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. Those are the stats you can increase by being an Acolyte background. They each come with a feat for free, an origin feat. So the Acolyte comes with the Magic Initiate Cleric. So irrespective of your class, you have some Cleric cantrip and a level 1 Cleric spell. Cool. You get your skill proficiencies. You get 2 skills, 1 tool. You get a language choice, which is just kind of generic. Then you get some equipment and then just a little background there. So it's way more mechanically focused. And as you said, way more integral to how the character is made. So I would not be surprised to see backgrounds becoming a more significant part of the add-on content down the line, even more so because of how dramatic these choices can be made.
Yeah, so like throughout the books they've been publishing, they would add a smattering of backgrounds. Like the Strixhaven book had like a background for each of the colleges or whatever. But I don't know that people noticed or cared that much. But now it feels like that this would be a actual helping of content if they added a bunch more backgrounds.
Absolutely. Yeah, especially because you can almost add extra origin feats and stuff, and they have a little sidebar which is nice, indicating that if you want to use backgrounds and species from older books, here's how you deal with it. So if you want to use, let's say, a Strixhaven background, cool. Here's your ability scores, and it comes with a feat already, so you don't need to pick an origin feat. If you pick up a different background that doesn't come with an origin feat, pick an origin feat of your choice. So, like, again, the backwards compatibility, I'm not sure how effective it's going to be in the long term, but it is nice for them to see at least little call-outs saying, yeah, you could still use some of this older content. It's not completely irrelevant. So, good on them.
Yeah, so like the next time I'm going to be a player character on the show, I guess besides Shardpoint, like season 13, I already have my character built. I don't know that I'm going to rebuild it using this book. Maybe I will. I'll take a look, but it doesn't feel like, oh, I have to. Like I'll have fucked up, but it might be interesting. It might, like, the thing that sticks out to me is none of these backgrounds have a feature. It used to be like rustic hospitality. Right. You can get like, someone will give you a room at an inn, and like they've taken that stuff out, which I don't mind necessarily because I feel like those were all very underutilized.
Right.
And a feat is just going to be juicier.
That's basically what happened, right? When we saw the Strixhaven, when we saw the Spelljammer stuff, we started seeing backgrounds that just gave you a feat as the feature. And I think that's what they leaned into. I also just think because that feat it's a nice bit of horizontal character customization. It's not strictly vertical, but it gives you a little bit more versatility. So you can imagine, for example, playing a character like, I don't know, you could imagine playing even a monk. And while the stats for the stuff for Sage is not ideal for a monk, you can still get wisdom, which is useful for you, in Constitution. And then you can have some wizard spells in your repertoire to go along with you being, like, let's say, an element monk. So you have some spells along with that. And it's a little bit of a ribbon, but hey, why not? I think that should make things a little bit fun. It also helps that the lucky feat, which they give you as one of your options for origin feats, is not as fucking busted as it was before.
Yeah, I think all these are pretty unambiguously good changes. I think
Yeah.
starting with the class makes sense. I think taking out some of the racist baggage makes sense.
Yep.
And I think beefing up backgrounds makes sense. So it's like 3 for 3 for me there.
Yep.
And then the next, like before we get into any like hard details here, do you have any thoughts on the character sheet itself? Because for me, I liked the old character sheet. I was useful and comfortable, but I noticed people rarely filled out the personality sections.
Correct.
And apparently their play testing agrees because that has been excised.
Yeah, like the background personality is a small block on the back of the page. I'll say one thing that is good about this is the fact that you could print this out on a single double-sided piece of paper and it's your entire character sheet on one page. Broadly speaking, that is a desirable thing to do when it comes to character sheet design, because especially when you look at like how 5th edition was, you basically had the pages set up in such a way where, for example, the spells section was hard to fill out and have all the details you want on it, whereas the spells section of the new character sheet, I think, is easier to parse important details like, is this a concentration spell? Is it a ritual compatible? Does it require a notable material component? And like those things are...
I basically developed my own notation for writing that stuff.
Right. And the only thing that I will kind of throw a little quibble about is the fact that they still lean on the whole idea of grouping the skills underneath those particular ability scores, which means that for the majority of players, they may not even think about, oh, these are things that you can actually do with other ability scores when relevant. But overall, the fact they were able to collapse it down into a single two-sided page, and if you need to do backstory and personality stuff in more detail, you can attach an extra document. I don't think that's a bad idea. I think this is ultimately the right type of direction to go in.
Yeah, at first I bristled when I saw that they had broken the skills into the different ability scores, and then I realized how much smoother the math would go.
Absolutely.
And I was like, no, this is correct. They're right.
And that's kind of thing. Like for me, I will bristle about it from one angle, but otherwise, like you can just put in, what's your modifier for intelligence? 3. Cool. Do you have proficiency with Arcana? Yes. Okay, so it's going to be 3 plus proficiency bonus there. You can look on the left-hand side of the front page of the character sheet and very easily figure out the math for what your different ability score or your different scores for your different proficiencies should be. And that's fine. Like,
they also finally solved the long-going running argument about if it was the modifier or the raw score in the big bubble. I know some people had strong opinions. Big number in the big bubble, small number in the small bubble, and no.
And to be completely clear, for 95+% of what you're doing, the modifier is what matters, not the score. So I'm not upset with that choice. I just like big number. I like the big number, but I totally understand that for all intents and purposes, if your wisdom is a 6, putting down, -2 is going to be more important since that is what is relevant for most of the time there. So like, preference aside, it is the correct choice to make for most players who are coming into here as newer players because, it's like, oh, do a strength check. Okay, I roll a d20. I'm going to add 12 to it. No. You add 1 because that's the modifier. Oh, right. And that kind of gets to your point. Like, it's just, it's what is actually relevant. This. Cool. Move on.
Yeah, I hate to hand it to them, but they did get a couple of things right here, so I can't do any fun bashing and bitching.
There's things we could bash. There's things we could poke fun at and stuff like that, but like, there are some things where I'm like, cool. Also, I'll throw one extra note your way that I think is kind of a neat detail here. In the creating a character section, there's this little section here just about starting at higher levels, which is nice because before that was something that's kind of more in the DMG, but here's a nice, simple 2-sentence phrase here. Because a lot of people have been being a little curmudgeon-y about the fact that certain classes do not get their subclasses at level 1 or 2 anymore. They all get it at level 3. So right here, I'm looking at D&D Beyond, so I don't have the book page for me. So I think this is going to be on page 43. Your DM might start your group at a level higher than 1. It is particularly recommended to start at level 3 if your group is composed of seasoned D&D players. And you know what? That's correct. That is the correct choice. For most people who are coming to the table with a well-realized idea about their character and what subclass they're going to be in, just start at level 3. And it's just nice to see it just written in plain text right there. and it doesn't make it feel super awkward. And I think that does alleviate some of those concerns. And then immediately afterwards, it says, hey, if you're starting at a higher level, here's an example of what your starting gold and equipment might be. And to your point about the feat issue, when 5th edition first came out, they were really leaning into, I've talked about this before, about this notion of backwards compatibility with older editions of D&D. And what my suspicion was they wanted the basic game to feel very much like pre-3rd edition D&D, when feats didn't exist and multi-classing wasn't a thing you did level by level. So those were listed underneath quote-unquote optional rules, multi-classing and feats. But because, as you said, people like feats and people like multi-classing, now those things are presented immediately without like it being kind of like, oh, as an option. And I think that is the right choice to do. As much as I have concerns over some of the munchkinning that can happen with like hyper specific multi-classing combinations, if you're going to do it, just don't be cute and say, oh, here's a optional thing you can do. So like, no, it's a rule. And don't be coy about it. It's like, it's an option you have, and just outlining it right away is nice to see.
Yeah, I mean, a recurring trait of a lot of these changes is something game designer Mark Rosewater always says is don't fight human nature.
Right.
So if there's something people clearly want to do, just let them do it. All the roadblocks you throw up because you think your game design is so clever and you don't want the players to fuck with it, you're just annoying them. And I think that's what they've clearly leaned into. Yeah. And I think some people are going to be like, oh, this is dumbing down for morons. And like, I listen, I have an elitist streak. I get it. But I don't think any of this stuff is like detrimental to the core experience if you want to be a big sweaty nerd.
No, not at all. And I think kind of what you're alluding to about like making the things operate more like people expected them to operate is more often than not kind of the general rule of what we're going to see when we look through the classes proper.
I don't know how long this is going to take, but I feel like this is the meat of it, because as far as like future seasons of Dice Funk, that's going to be the question. Are you a 2014 barbarian or a 2024 barbarian?
Yep. And if you were to ask me that, I'd say 2024. Very easy. It's a very easy pick, because when we look at the martial classes, for the most part, they broadly have gotten this is where I get to the whole 4th edition thing. 4th edition's one of its main design ethos was giving the players choices at multiple levels of play. And so while it's not the biggest feature of that, biggest way to achieve that, things like weapon mastery is a thing that kind of aids to that, because with weapon mastery for a barbarian, now we are using certain weapons you have weapon mastery with, you get extra riders when you attack people with it, right?
Yeah, we talked about this, I think, in the Final Fantasy XIV one, but now weapons have like secret abilities. This is cool to me. I've used a sword many times. I don't think about it. Swords are swords. Who gives a shit? Now it's like, oh, well, maybe I can do a little damage on a miss. It's mathematically in the fight. Will that matter? Probably not, but
no. But like, for example, one of the things you might have as a barbarian, you might have like a weapon with the cleave property. So if you hit somebody, you can make an additional attack against a second creature for free, and you don't get to apply your modifier, but you get to do an extra weapon damage dice on someone else there. Like, it's a small rider, but it gives you that choice. It also, one of the things that I know that oh shoot, now I'm trying to remember his name.
It's just so flavorful for a barbarian to swing through one goblin into another. I'm sorry, it rocks.
One thing that Jeremy Crawford kind of tapped into is one of his reasons why he was big into weapon mastery was the fact that because you can pick mastery for multiple weapons, it kind of encourages you to like have multiple weapons on hand to switch between. And I think, you know, that can be a little risky on lower magic item campaigns, but the idea of swapping between weapons for different purposes does have an appeal to it. So I think that, and that's something that barbarians get. Barbarians get a bunch of other things I think are kind of cute. So to point out one of the funniest things I can think of here is, let's just talk about the level 3 ability, Primal Knowledge. All right.
All right, let's do it.
So so Rage has already been upgraded insofar that when you activate Rage, it lasts for 10 minutes, I believe is when you activate it. And it can last for up to 10 minutes. And if you can't attack somebody or take damage, you can force somebody to make a saving throw or just use a bonus action to sustain your rage. So you can start a rage outside of fights and hold on to it as long as you have bonus actions. At level 3, they have this thing called Primal Knowledge, which is 1, you get an extra skill proficiency, good. But while your rage is active, you can do an acrobatics, intimidation, perception, stealth, or survival check with strength instead of its other ability score while you're raging, basically.
Yeah, like using your rage to intimidate. That seems pretty natural. I don't know why I'd never thought of that.
Right. And what's nice about it, too, is the fact that, you know, this may be like, oh, man, I'm going to burn through all my rages too quickly. They do give you a cookie, whereas in 5th edition proper, you only got your rages back after a long rest. You do get 1 rage back every short rest. So you basically have 1 free use of rage per short rest that you can use in combat or out of combat for different purposes. And that's pretty cute to see.
And isn't rage last longer now? It used to be 10 minutes. Now it's an hour. So
No. It used to be 1 minute and now it's 10 minutes.
Oh, Christ. Okay.
But that's still an order of magnitude more time.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, you're thinking about Bardic Inspiration, because Bardic Inspiration used to be like within 10 minutes and now it's an hour. So
okay, that's it.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I know we're gonna get there, but I would never have played a 2014 Bard on the show. I'm just not interested. It seems really annoying. And like I'm like, oh, I would play a 2024 Bard on the show.
The other thing that Barbarian got that's been broadly viewed as like a big thumbs up by a lot of folks is the level 9 feature Brutal Strike. So in 2024, what Barbarians had was this feature called Brutal Criticals, where you did more damage dice when you crit as a Barbarian, which, you know, makes sense. Barbarians traditionally have this focal point on crits and stuff. However, it only activates when you crit. So what Brutal Strike does is says, hey, listen, if you have advantage on a strength-based attack, you can choose to not have advantage, and if you hit, you do bonus damage and then can do an extra effect with your attack. And this is very 4th edition-y. So imagine you have advantage on an attack, you say no. You attack and still hit, you do a bonus D10 damage, and you can either knock the opponent 15 feet away and then charge at them without provoking opportunity attacks, or reduce their speed by 15 feet until the start of your next turn.
Yeah, more choices, so more for high skill players. I think this is for a normal person. You're like, I just want to bonk them or whatever.
Right.
But if you're like really thinking with portals, you can do some stuff here.
Absolutely, especially because later on, one of the things they add at level 17 is the ability to apply multiple Brutal Strike features at the same time. So you could hit somebody, knock them 15 feet away, and then reduce their speed so they have to spend all their time running back to you, and just loop that over and over. You know, that's stuff that's like, okay, as we get into the higher levels, now your Barbarian has all these different options for what they do every time they attack, and that's what makes it feel more 4th edition-y, where now you're not just I swing weapon, you're like, I swing weapon, but what do I want to do with my weapon as I swing it, you know?
Yeah, you've said many times the 4th edition melee fighters have spell-like abilities, and that is something you miss in 5th edition. I know plenty of people who have said find fighters boring because all you do is attack. Yeah. I am doing a lot of this stuff in my imagination. You know, I'm thinking of doing Tekken juggle combos or whatever, but it's not in the book. And this one lets you do stuff like that.
Yeah, you want to talk about one that makes you do lots of stuff. I mean, another example of like a good name change. The Totem Warrior Barbarian got renamed to Wild Heart, which matches Baldur's Gate 3. They've tweaked out how some of the features work. Probably the biggest change there is that in 2014 version, when you picked that branch of Barbarian, you picked either Bear, Eagle, or Wolf as like your rage style, and that was it. 2024, you choose which rage style each time you rage. Simple choice, huge implications in terms of options for the player, because maybe you want to be Bear for this fight and have more resistances, or maybe you want to be Wolf, where now whenever you're adjacent to an enemy, everyone gets advantage on attack rolls against them, right? Like,
yeah.
That's why I'm like, Barbarian now has these options to be more of a team player and almost like a leader on the battlefield and not just hit thing.
Yeah, and game design, this is called like modality.
Exactly.
Where basically it's giving you branching points at different yeah, different things which otherwise wouldn't be a choice.
Speaking of branches, there's the new subclass, the Path of the World Tree that they added, which is bonkers when you look at how it kind of operates at higher levels.
You know I love a world tree.
Yeah, it even referenced Yggdrasil literally in there, which is cool. Here's the basic running notes here. Level 3, you get bonus temporary hit points when you start your rage, and every turn you can give other people temporary hit points.
It's so funny because highly 100% would have been a fun.
Would have absolutely. Yeah, the level 6 feature is when someone starts their turn within 30 feet of you while you're raging, you can just make them do a strength saving throw and pull them adjacent to you by teleporting them. And by the way, they actually codified this in the rules that if you are doing this to an ally, the ally can just choose to fail the save. That was not codified in the rules before. It is explicitly codified here. So, oh, you see a friend that's in trouble, you can teleport them adjacent to you to get them out of trouble. Cool.
The level 10 ability for the Path of the World Tree is called Battering Roots, which fucking Killings. This episode's gonna come out pretty soon, but you're gonna hear Killings do this exact shit for the next 3 episodes.
The fact that it adds 10 feet reach to any weapons that are heavy or versatile, which means if a weapon has 10-foot reach, now has 20-foot reach, and when you hit an enemy with that weapon that turn, you can add either the push or topple weapon mastery plus the mastery on the weapon. So again, you get more modality in what you do there. And then the level 14 feature is hilarious because we activate your rage, or as a bonus action, you can just teleport 60 feet every turn. Yeah. And once per rage, you can say, hey, everybody, all my friends, I'm going to teleport 150 feet and pull all of you along with me. So you could, for example, pop rage, peer through a window into a room with a bunch of guys are in their den, and teleport your party in the middle of them to open a fight, right?
It's sick. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Like I said, that sort of stuff, I look at that, I'm like, this is what I want out of my rule books. Okay. I want to look at something and be like, oh, I'm getting inspired about how that makes my character feels. Let's go. So
we got to find something to complain about because it's too good so far.
Well, and we'll find things to complain about. Don't worry. We're not going to find that many things to complain about for Barbarian, unfortunately. It's just the fact of the matter is that Barbarian is definitely one of the ones that was a bit more of a winner. I know I've already talked about the Path of the Zealot features with some of the folks on the Discord. It is very different. It is less focused on surviving beyond death and more about just being a sort of a half paladin type entity, because you get a lay on hands type feature. You get to do basically bonus necrotic or radiant damage when you hit people and stuff like that. And you even get a mode when you can fly around and prevent people from dying using your rages as a resource. So for some people, that's not going to match with what they're doing. And in those cases, that's a case of, like you said, play the 2014 version of the class, Yeah.
And they'll give that's ideal. That giving me a different take on it and I can choose is definitely better. So I like that.
Well, we're not going to be complaining as much about Bard because Bard is the next one on the list here. And Bard generally, I think, is pretty strong upgrades overall.
Yeah, when I read through this book, and like I said, I did only one read through of it, and I feel like I had a medium grasp. I don't want to claim I'm an expert or anything, but this is what stuck out to me. I was like, oh, they really did a great job of making me want to play a bard when I never would have before.
Right.
And this is my biggest takeaway. So
yeah, the opportunity cost of using bardic inspiration has been heavily diminished because you give it to someone, it lasts for up an hour. They can wait until they know if they are failing a check before they can use bardic inspiration. And that just makes it way less of a feel bad to deal with. Also, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was I might be mistaken. There's other cases where no, I know what it is. It's starting at level 5. Not only do you get your bardic inspirations back after a short rest, you can also burn a spell slot to get bardic inspiration on there. So you could play a bard that never cast spells and just use all their spell slots to just do more bardic inspiration. That's an option. Is it a good one? Maybe in the right party,
Yeah. If you have a bunch of fighters or something.
Yeah, for sure. You go along. One of the things I forgot to mention as a bit of a detail about all the classes is that they all have a capstone at level 20, but at level 19, they get access to the epic boon feats, basically. And And those are, we'll get to those. I want to kind of hold those for a separate thing. That is one of those areas where I'm like, I'm not sure what Watsu thought they were cooking with here.
Yeah, the level 19 and 20 features are always things that I skim past because I'm like, not only does that never come up, but like at a certain point, yeah, you get wish. So like I am actually going to decide what's happening here. Thank you, Watsi, for your suggestions.
To give you a point, like what does Barbarian get at level 20? It's very simple. They get +4 to Strength and Constitution on the spot, period. That means that's just good. What does Bard get? They get Words of Creation, which means they have Power Word Heal and Power Word Kill always prepared.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, but it's more of a flavor thing, I feel like, than...
So for Bard, they have 3 returning subclasses, the Glamour, Lore, and Valor colleges. Of those, Valor basically sucks, grand scheme of things, mostly just because it doesn't do enough to make it fightery, to really kind of show up the fact you're kind of losing a lot of access to other features like you would from Lore and Glamour. And then the new one they added is College of Dance, which is just hilarious.
Yeah, that's probably the one I do because it feels so unique. I mean, you said College of Valor sucks, but it's like, if you want to be a fighter, be a fighter. So it's you. I think you could do it like as like a flavor statement, but you're not. Yeah, you're not going to keep up in damage.
As something like, so you, I know, are aware of the old D&D 4th edition campaign where I played as Garrett Chaldea, and he was a Valor Bard in 4th edition, and that was so much fun. That's what makes me annoyed about Valor Bards sucking in 5th edition and otherwise. Like, all they need to do is offer more interesting uses of Bardic Inspiration or spellcasting, but College of Dance, however, is basically, do you want to be a monk and a bard at the same time? Here you go.
And I do. I do.
And that is exactly what you have. Like the fact that it gives you dexterity instead of strength for unarmed strikes, perfect. The fact that your armor class is dex plus charisma, amazing. I'm trying to think of some other ones. I love this one. Oh, right. One of the things I love is the following here. So you have tandem footwork at level 6, which just means basically when you roll initiative, you can use Bardic Inspiration to give everyone a bonus to initiative. Very cute. 14 is the best feature for me. Leading Evasion. It gives you the evasion feature from like Rogue, but also gives it to anyone that's adjacent to you, which is really wild. That's just hilarious. The fact that like someone throws a fireball at your party, and because you're the dance bard, somehow everyone like does like a flash mob dance and avoids the fireball. Cool.
Yeah.
You know?
Everyone gets into a big musical number together where you all spontaneously know the choreography.
They also did a really great job with their selection of the art for College of Dance. It's a great look there. Yes. So
I know I feel like I am slacking on my art criticism because that's something I care about a lot, but yeah, it's really good. I should also point out some of the structural things with these chapters we have mentioned. One is they've moved the big chart. I don't know if there's a name for this. I always call it the big chart.
Yep.
From the beginning of these sections in a little deeper in.
Yep.
I don't remember where I saw this. I saw someone say that new players found the charts intimidating.
No, and you know what, to be fair, like what they do now is they open with this table called core traits. And this is something that's very reminiscent of what I saw in Pathfinder 2nd edition, where the first thing you saw was not the progression chart, but just a introductory summary of what does taking your first level in this class mean. Here you go. And then
it is much more built for character creation rather than character leveling up. I mean, it'll take a little getting used to because I expect it at the beginning, but I don't think it's bad.
Another thing that's not bad, honestly, is the fact they put the spell list in the same section as the character class, as opposed to back in the spellcasting sections. When you're looking at Bard, you can look at the Bard spell list right away and not have to leave that section of the book. And for me, that's always a plus.
Yeah, that was my next point, was that, usually it used to be all the spells were all together near the back of the book. And now it's like if I'm playing a bard, the bard spells are with the bard. Yep. And once again, it's going to take a little adjusting. I don't think it's like you said, side grade. It's just different. It's not like necessarily better or worse.
I think it's overall an upgrade just because, again, it's like, okay, I want to play a bard. What spells do I have access to? Here they are, as opposed to, let me go to the magic section, find the bard spell list in there, and look through that. One other big notable upgrade, by the way, to give an example of like how things should work, all the characters that do spell casting, when they learn cantrips at level 1, they basically just added in a rule that was kind of part of the Tasha's Cauldron, like extra rules, where when you gain a level, you can swap out cantrips. Before, that was just literally impossible to do. If you picked a cantrip that you found out you didn't like it, by rule, there was no way to fix that in the book proper. And now it's just like, oh, you pick up Dancing Lights and Vicious Mockery as a bard, but you're not using Dancing Lights. You can, next level, replace Dancing Lights with True Strike or Prestidigitation, you know?
Oh, that's interesting. That's one of those things that I feel like is home ruled so often that I might have thought it was official. Like I always like when you level up, you can switch some spells. It's fine.
Right. You could switch spells, but not cantrips, because as Jeremy Crawford would say, cantrips aren't spells. At least that's how they're defined in 14, which was a wild thing to say at one point there. But now they're like, no, their spells are just level 0 spells, and here's how they're treated. So again, it's just easier, cleaner language in that front there. So, and every spell in this section that has an M next to it are spells with material components that cannot be replaced with a spell casting focus or a material pouch. And that's another thing I like about it. It's just, it's more clear to the player from step one. If you want to pick up, let's say, Identify, you can't just cast it for free. You're gonna need to have a pearl worth 100 plus gold to cast it, because it has a explicit costed material component. So again, more explicit definitions, always going to make me happy.
Yeah, I was thinking that when they were making this book, I was like, my number one priority would have been kind of redoing the somatic material like system, because I think a lot of people find it complicated. They didn't do that, but clearly labeling it is the second best option, right. I guess.
Yeah, there's times where verbal components will matter. Like the hide rules are different, where now if you're trying to hide, it's just a standard DC 15 check. Or some other sort of value based on what's going on. But it even makes a note that you stay hidden until you do certain things or use a spell with a verbal component. So, like, that's fine, and that might come up in some cases, but this is still better than a lot of things. So, while Barbarian and Bard definitely got upgrades in terms of their subclass options, going from 2 each to 4, we now go to Cleric, which went from 7 down to 4, because they wanted to make sure that every class had 4 subclass choices to go with them in this book for better parity between them.
Yeah, I was actually, I think, talking to Quinn about this, where I was like, you would not believe how much fewer wizards there are, which I guess we'll get to. But I kind of like the clean parallelism. Yeah. I feel like it might feel like they're taking away content from you. But as we've said, there's also more modality to individual abilities, if that makes sense.
And to that point, to give an example of it, you don't get your cleric subclass till level 3. And one of the things a lot of the cleric subclasses would do at level 1 was either give you some weapon like armor proficiency or give you some more spellcasting focus. Now they're just like level 1 divine order, choose either heavy armor and martial weapon proficiency or bonus cantrip, and now you can use your wisdom modifier on religion and arcana checks on top of intelligence. So basically you can be as good as a wizard on arcana and religion checks using wisdom instead of intelligence, or actually you're using both because there's a bonus on top of that.
Yeah, I think I saw someone say that finally clerics can know as much about religion as wizards.
Right, exactly, and like that's another example of player agency and choice. It doesn't have this weird thing of like, oh, I'm just picking this cleric subclass to be devoted to this specific god for this mechanical benefit. It's like, cool, that cleans up. And they actually extend this further down the line, where at level 7, you can choose either Divine Strikes, where you do bonus damage with weapons, or Potent Spellcasting, where you add your Wisdom modifier to your Cleric cantrip damage. Great. Excellent. And then that means that the domains can be focused more on just features that are relevant about those domains. The 4 that we have in here are Life, Light, Trickery, and War, which is a good set of 4.
Yeah, I wonder if they just like focus tested one of the most popular ones, or like what was their priority there? Was like making different like as differently playable ones as possible? Like what did they,
you could argue that for Life, Light, and War. I think those are 3 of the more popular domains. Like one that I wish was there was like the arcane or knowledge domains, but those could come down the line. Some people speculate that Trickery is only in there because of Shadowheart, and that
Shadowheart. literally gonna say that. That's so funny because also the first thing I do whenever I play a new Baldur's Gate 3 file, which is not infrequent, is I take my wife out of Trickery and then put her in Storm because it's so much good. It's so much better. But Storm is not an option here, so I guess Shadowheart stays Trickery.
Yeah, and they've done things to kind of like revise and refine the different domains. Again, another case of where the different subclass arts really do a nice job. I love the art they have for the Trickery domain. It's a really cute little detail. The character there looks almost Anne-like to a certain degree in my mind.
Yeah.
She looks a less pyromaniac, perhaps, but you know.
Yeah. I like it now. I was definitely thinking there's a art in the wizard section. I think it's the evoker subclass, which I'm like, that is Taco from Adventure Zone. Like, straight up is.
Oh yeah, we'll get there. Like,
so I'm not saying it's Anne, but I'm saying if it was Anne, I wouldn't like. I'd be flattered, but not flabbergasted.
For sure. But overall, like, I didn't go into as much detail reading over the cleric subclasses as much as I would have liked, but I do note that there are some differences among them, and most of those differences are probably mild. Basically, there are features that are being added in exchange for the fact that they don't have like some of these other features that are now just class choices. I'm trying to see if I can pull up one of the differences that was coming to mind here.
While you're doing that, I want to say they did unify the language around subclasses. I think it used to be like, but barbarians pick a primal path. Correct. And now you pick a subclass. Everyone picks a subclass. I don't know if that's...
They're still called like path of, but they're just called subclasses. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing because, for example, you pick a cleric subclass, but they're still called domains. So... let me double check here. Oh, so for example, one interesting detail is that did you know that in 2014, Blessing of the Trickster could not be applied on yourself?
I did not.
Yeah, that is now the case in 2024, right? That's just like, oh, okay. And that's, well, like you said, it's like, oh, because literally Blessing of the Trickster 2014, you can use your action to touch a willing creature other than yourself to give it advantage on stealth. Why can't you do it to yourself? And the difference here is that Blessing of the Trickster lasts until a long rest, not for an hour. So, like, you can basically guarantee that someone in your party always has advantage on stealth checks.
Which, to be honest, I feel like this is something you exclusively take on someone who has hella heavy armor, and to make their stealth normal forever.
You totally do that for sure. And like they've also added some nice, for example, one of the spells they added for Trickery Domain, they added Invisibility. They added Pass Without Trace as third level spells because, you know, those things were, you can as third level. Hypnotic Pattern is the spell they get in there, which is great. You know, they've done some other tweaks with how Invoke Duplicity works. One thing that's kind of a neat detail is at level 6, while your Invoke Duplicity is active, you can swap places with it. So you can move your duplicate around and cast spells from it, and then when someone tries to attack you, swap places with your duplicate. So in many ways, the Trickery Domain is a lot more actively fun to play because it's more focused around your duplicate that you manipulate around the field and do stuff with. So I could look at this and be like, cool, I could totally play Trickery Domain Cleric and have some fun shenanigans with it, much more than what we had in the original version. And also as a note, Trickery Domain Clerics were ones that got Divine Strike, so they're focused on weapons. But now because the spellcasting versus weapon proficiency stuff is decoupled, you could be a spell-slinging Trickery Cleric or a weapon user Trickery Cleric, and both are available. And that's what I mean by, like, even though they only have 4 domains, there's technically 2 different flavors of each one of them, depending whether you go heavy armor and weapon versus spellcasting.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. I would keep Shadowheart this version of the Trickery Cleric, I would say. So,
oh yeah, like the fact, like it's so funny because you look at this, you're like, oh, of course, this is how Trickery Domain Cleric should work, because on its face, it felt kind of underwhelming, even in Baldur's Gate 3, you know.
Yeah, which something we didn't even mention in the section where we were talking about the cultural dominance of the brand. They're so fucking lucky. Yeah, I can't believe they just keep hitting the lottery.
The fact that Larian, they allowed Larian to do what they did, And Larian did a lot of stuff. And from my understanding, there were some features of 2014 that were directly inspired by Baldur's Gate. And I would not be surprised if that is actually true, because there are some things that they did in Baldur's Gate 3 that, like you said, leans into people being like, this is how this should have always worked. And then what's being like, we agree. Thank you, Larian, for doing development for us.
Yeah, I mean, good on Larian. He's just a best-in-class developer, but it just seems unfair that these fucking things keep falling into WotC's lap, no matter how fucking evil they are.
Like, Hasbro can't keep getting away with it, and somehow absolutely. They do. All right, ready for Druid?
This is a big one because I find Druid so overwhelming in 2014. I was like, when Dan picked it, I was like, you're the only player I think wild enough to try this shit now. Do you think they fixed it at all? It's so complicated.
It's still pretty complicated. They do some of the same things as Cleric, where at level 1 you could pick to be a more Magician or Warden. So as a Warden you get weapons and armor. As Magician you get extra spells, and you also get to do Arcana or Nature with Wisdom. Again, great design space. In terms of Wild Shape, you know me, I don't do Wild Shape. That's why I did the Star Domain the Star Circle Cleric, the Star Circle Druid rather, which they have in the PHB, which I'm very happy about. That is great. But like the fact that they have Wild Companion in there where you can do like Find Familiar with Wild Shape. That was one of those things they added in Tasha's Cauldron that they brought in here. The biggest thing, of course, with all this is just the matter of like, okay, Wild Shape, you talked about this with Dan during Crew Gunk about like how they had the playtest version that did not go over well. And one of the things they've done, at least in this version, to help matters is that they at least have a list of beasts in the PHB, so you don't need to get the monster manual to start doing Wild Shape stuff, right?
Yeah, I don't know how you fix this. I'll be honest. It seems like an intractable problem. Like the Druid has its own like mini game inside the game.
Yeah, for sure. And like there's tricky elements of there, like Circle the Moon. I cannot make any comment about it. It is something that I'm pretty sure is reasonably potent in its own right, but I have no really strong opinion about it because it's just not a subclass that really appealed. It's not a playstyle that appealed to me. Like, you saw how I played Aze, and I could play Aze as a 2024 Druid without any problem because there's no compatibility issue. And honestly, Aze would have been even more powerful because now there's more options to make you lean harder as a spellcaster. Or if you want to be more of a melee person, you can choose that branch as well, just like Cleric. If anything, this has made Druid feel more like Cleric, with the added layer that Druid also has Wild Shape as a resource that's very different than Channel Divinity.
Yeah. I think that I would play a more spellcasting focused Druid. I don't think there's anything wrong with it inherently.
Sure.
Yeah.
I do think it's kind of fun, though, that you could actually be like a sword and board. You could be like a warden type that has armor and weapons. You're going to the front lines. You're using your spell casting as a support mechanism. And that's fine. I think that's pretty cute.
Yeah. I mean, do they still have the restrictions about metal equipment?
Not explicitly, no, at least as far as I can tell. Like,
okay. That used to be a thing. The Druids weren't allowed to carry metal around.
One thing that's kind of a cute little ribbon feature is they have Druidic as a language, but they always have Speak with Animal spell prepared as a spell, which is like, sure, why not? Yeah. That makes sense. Jumping forward to Fighter.
Yeah.
Like I said, I unfortunately have less to say about Druids, unfortunately, in this case. I could do some more reading and dive into it, but there's so much shit to go through.
Sure. And time is finite. We're over an hour.
Yeah. We're already over an hour in, yes. Fighter. So Fighter is the big beneficiary of weapon mastery because they get more weapon masteries than anyone else, and they get the ability to do more with it. So for example, at level 9, the Fighter gets the option to, when they hit somebody with a weapon they have mastery with, they can replace it with push, sap, which basically is impose disadvantage, or slow. So now each weapon has up to 4 different weapon masteries you can pick every attack. And like that's where fighters all of a sudden kind of explode in terms of like feeling very 4th edition-y, because now every attack you can kind of choose stuff you do with it there. So I think that's pretty cool to see that for them. I'm happy for them. And that gets going on there. But fighter, generally speaking, pretty straightforward sort of stuff. They get some cleaner usage of how some things work, like their fighting styles are now feats as opposed to just things that are in a list, which is fine. They also indicate how you can replace your fighting style feat when you gain a level. So that's also great. You know what I mean? You're like, I want to do the style fighter. Oh, it's not playing out so well. Or maybe I'm just prepping for a different branch of the campaign. I'm going to switch from archery to protection.
Yeah, I think the thing with like switching things that are kind of core to your character from a game design perspective is you don't want people doing it like constantly, because it feels like you're not like a specific character. You're just like free floating math. But restricting it to level ups does make it could be like a milestone in your journey and adventure. So it's fine. Yeah,
and weapon mastery, however, so you can change after a long rest, but that's fine because it's almost like a wizard changing their spell preparations. And so like, those are things that makes it feel significantly better. When you get to the subclasses, Battlemaster is basically the same as it was. They just get some slight tweaks to their numbers. The biggest benefit that Battlemasters get is at level 15, you don't need to spend superiority dice anymore, because basically you can use a maneuver and have a D8 to use for free. So it's not as good as a superiority dice, but you always can do it every turn. So now it becomes a lot more flexible there. Champion is interesting.
Oh yeah, this is to me like the default bonk
it
master.
Is.
They bonk,
and so it has gotten much better because the crit range goes up to being 18 to 20 eventually, which is fine. They get a bonus fighting style, which is just fine. And then at level 10, I mentioned before, you can get heroic inspiration whenever you start your turn without it during combat. So I'm just like, okay. And then at level 18, you get Survivor, which means you have advantage on death saving throws. If you roll an 18 or higher, you gain the benefit of a natural 20. So like, and the first instance of a big keyword here, Heroic Rally. At the start of each of your turns, you regain hit points equal to 5 plus your Constitution modifier if you are bloodied and have at least 1 hit point.
Bloodied mentioned.
Yeah, bloodied actually being back as a keyed term. You know, another 4th edition win for this whole thing. But like that makes Champion simple in many ways, but they still have the complexities of weapon masteries, but they are just effective. And that's like, that's great. Good.
This is the most straightforward. This is like the character I would tell someone to start with if they were new to the game. What do you think about Bloodied Return? Because I remember early in this show someone saying like, "Oh, are they bloodied?" And I was like, "That's not a thing anymore." I know what you mean, but does that matter, or is that just like a fun little Easter egg?
It's good. I think the big thing that I think makes a big difference is that the fact that it's codified means you can tie mechanics to it there, both for players and opponents. So, for example, a common thing in 4th edition is that if a boss became bloodied, they'd have a phase change in the fight in some capacity, or an immediate reaction they could do in response to becoming bloodied. And you've done this as well in some of your boss fight configurations.
I was about to say I already do that. Like they took it away from me, but I just ignored that, and I absolutely still do it.
And having it tied to players, for example, if you're playing a champion fighter at level 18, you're not going to be as opposed to getting hit because you have healing that you do every round when you're bloodied. So, you know, you basically have a certain amount of like, okay, if your constitution is, let's say 18, you get 9 free hit points every round while you're bloody, which is not much, but it's something, you know? Let me see what else here. Eldritch Knights, I'll point out the two biggest changes for them. Number 1, they don't have restrictions on wizard schools of spells to pick from. It's just, you can pick wizard spells, easy. And probably the most significant one for anyone who wants to play it, War Magic. Before it was, when you attack on your turn, you can cast a spell as a bonus action. Now it is, or something like, it's something like if you cast a spell, you can do a weapon attack as a bonus action. One of those two things here. Now it's just strictly better. You can, when you take the attack action, you can replace one of the attacks with a wizard cantrip. And that is huge, because that is actually a damage gain for some fighters to do that, because cantrips will become more powerful as you level. So doing one of those in place of one of your weapon attacks actually gives you a little extra oomph to your attacks. And if you have access to extra wizard cantrips, like say, for example, being, let's say, a sage fighter, now you have options every time you attack on which cantrip you want to weave into your attacks, which is great. Like I said, super happy to see that sort of change. It makes Eldritch Knights a lot more compelling. And then we get to the new subclass that's in the book, Psi Warrior, which has been around, but it's one of several psionic subclasses we have in the book here.
Yeah, they've been trying to do things with psionics for a while. There's been like Unearthed Arcana and stuff. I've definitely looked at it. I think the Soul Knife is also back for
Correct.
rogues. I actually was thinking about playing a Soul Knife sometime. I don't know if I'll do it immediately, but I don't know. What do you think is like the trade-off between the two different like psionic classes?
Well, like for me, I've not delved too deeply into it. I think that scions were always kind of a tricky topic, because I remember in 3rd edition playing a campaign, my first D&D campaign, and one of the players was a scion, and there was always this kind of like attitude about it being like this over munchkin-y sort of class that had almost too many features for its own good, and it made itself very diverse, made divergent. 4th edition had a collection of psionic classes, and it did a decent job with how they were set up, but they were still rather divergent in feel. And when the psionic, or the mystic as it was called, was unveiled in Unearthed Arcana, it was never made official, and the simple reason why I could describe why is because it was too much for a 5th edition class. It was like the Warlock, but with even more lateral choices, to the point where it probably did not feel like a 5th edition class. And so I think the reaction, the resolve to choose psionic subclasses, especially for these martial characters, I think is a bit of an in-between option, where they're basically leveraging the current design space, but giving the psionic flavor with the mixture of things like being able to do telekinetic movement as a psi warrior and stuff like that. And I do know that the psionic subclasses are fairly popular choices for people who I've talked to about it.
Yeah, the problem is that you want to differentiate it from a normal spellcaster, but then you have to add so many things, it gets overwhelming.
Exactly. And so in this case here, by having the psionic thing being like, hey, you have your psionic dice, and you can spend them to do these extra writer features on what you're doing, is a way to make it not feel like a spellcaster, but make it feel supernatural beyond just a conventional fighter. So they actually did a pretty good job between Battlemaster being the 4th edition style versatile fighter, the Champion as the simple punch boy, Eldritch Knight as wizard knight, and Psi Warrior as psychic knight, you know? Yep. So it works.
Moving on to Monk, we have another one of those things that doesn't like mechanically matter, but is a big cultural shift in terminology. They have changed key to focus, like changing race to species. I think this is probably smart. It doesn't like change the game, but it definitely clears up some of like the Orientalism stuff.
I also just like the fact they have a nice big old dragonborn with a tail featured in the key art for Monk there. I'm like, hell yeah, Trajan justified. Let's go, gamers.
Yeah, do Dragonborn have tails? Do Tiefling have tails? Everyone has tails.
Yeah. So big changes for monks, I'll point out real quick, is that number one, the damage dice have been increased for martial arts. They went from starting at D4 to starting at D6, and they end up as D12 by level 17. Great.
Because before you were trying to optimize weapons and then try to switch to martial arts because the martial arts die weren't high enough. You know what I'm saying?
Right. It becomes a lot more, and it's now a much cleaner. They also cleaned up some of the language. So before, it's like, okay, you want to do an unarmed strike as a bonus action. Well, you need to use your action to attack, actually. They're like, no, you could just make an unarmed strike as a bonus action. They just made the language fit what people actually do. Going back to your Mark Rosewater reference there, I've seen so many people try to start a round by doing a flurry of blows, and I'm like, you can't do that by rule, my dude. Kind of thing there. So other elements about the monk that are changed notably is the fact that when you do grappling, they also now can use their dexterity instead of strength. So now, again, this is just another one of those things that just feels right. The idea that when you do grappling as a monk, it should key off your actual ability score of dexterity instead of strength. So now you want to make a wrestler monk? Cool. It just works as expected.
They should, in the next book, just say, actually, in this universe, there's no grappling. No one ever figured out how to do it. Don't worry about it. It's a universe without grappling. Leave us alone.
So one thing that's some other big changes I'll point out, deflect attacks, big upgrade, where now you can deflect any attack that makes bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage, ranged or melee. And if you reduce the damage to 0, you can redirect it. So that gives me the peak martial arts thing of somebody comes to punch you and you redirect the punch into their friend's face. Perfect, you know?
Yeah, that's a big one. It used to be just deflect missiles. I don't know if you specified that for people.
Yeah, it used to be deflect missiles and was only ranged. It was only ranged attacks. And then when you get to level 13, you can deflect any attack. So it has to be an attack roll, but it could be a spell. So someone does like firebolt to you, you can redirect firebolt. Why not? One of the other,
if you have it a focus.
Yeah. One of the other substantive changes is the way the stunning strike works. So now stunning strike can only be, let me double check here just to be really clear. Once per turn, you can attempt to do a stunning strike. And before, if you tried a stunning strike and it worked, it was hugely an issue, right? You've seen it before, Austin. Somebody gets locked down. But if they succeed on the save, it's a feel bad for the monk because they've just wasted a resource. This basically bridges the gap. So when if they fail on the save, they're stunned until the start of the monk's next turn, as opposed to the end of their next turn. And then the second big change is that if they succeed at the save, their speed is halved, and the next attack made against them is with advantage.
Yeah, so they basically shrunk the window of effectiveness.
Right. And give you a cookie in case it doesn't go your way, which is fine. You know what? No problem there. And beyond that, the other changes are generally pretty nice. I like most of the changes to Monk. They add a little bit more functionality and oomph. And then you have your 4 subclasses. Mercy is the new one they added in here in terms of being the PHB. Shadow is new in terms of the PHB, so, you know, Reaper winning, just getting the representation in there. And probably the biggest glow up has got to be for the Warrior of the Elements. The 4 Element Monk being viewed as like one of the worst subclasses ever, basically getting upgraded by effectively being merged with the Dragon Monk and with a little touch of Avatar: The Last Airbender, you know?
Yeah. I'm surprised I wasn't that, because I mean, Airbender came out before 2014, so.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. Like what they were trying to do with the original 4 Element Monk, they're trying to make it into a spellcaster feeling thing where you basically slung wizard-like spells. And now they're basically doing that by basically stripping things down a little bit more. So, and making it more straightforward. So they get this cantrip called Elementalism, which is basically just like air, earth, fire, water bending. But the bigger detail is that you can burn a focus point to get 10 minutes of basically elemental strikes, where your reach is increased by 10, and you can do acid, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage on each of your attacks. Cool, you know? Like, yeah. It just works nice and easy, and I don't have any real big issues with it. I think Warrior of the Open Hand is mostly the same with some mild tweaks in there, but yeah, like overall, Monk, a lot of people, when I look at like impressions among fans and otherwise, people look at Monk like, oh yeah, Monk definitely got a glow up here, and good for them, you know?
I was surprised that they included Mercy, because that was in one of the other books or something, and it's like a plague doctor themed monk, which I didn't know how wide the appeal was. So that's a pleasant surprise. It's a healing monk, basically.
Yes, and that's actually something I wanted to kind of commend WotC for, to give them way too much credit. Is the fact that there is at least one option, it feels like, for each of these classes, for the subclasses, that allows you to play a markedly different feeling character. than the others, right?
Yeah.
You have like for the barbarian, you can debate either the zealot or the world tree being a little bit different. For bard, the dance bard is very different. For cleric, trickery domain is now very different flavor wise than what is before. With druid, you have the star druid, obviously is sort of my kind of favorite there. For fighter, we now have 4 very different feeling classes there. And monk, mercy just being there is like a neat little detail, because warrior of mercy began its life as a paladin subclass, and then it became a monk one. And that was interesting. So like, yeah, I think it's neat to see that in there. And I think the key art for it is cool because you have that little plague doctor mask. I remember reading in RPG Bots like summary that they were sad that you did not get the mask as a feature. Like, it's just like you have to wear the plague doctor mask when you're out there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it is a kind of unique iconography, but I don't think there's anything in the mechanic. You can play it as something else. Like, it's just the importance is you have a healing hand and a harming hand.
Right, exactly. And speaking of healing hand, that leads us cleanly into the paladin, which is next alphabetically. Segue. So yeah, paladin and paladin ranger have a lot of overlap because they're half casters that get, for example, spell casting at level 1 instead of level 2. So paladins begin now with spells, and they can also opt to begin with cantrips if they want, with one of their fighting style choices at level 2. But among the major changes of paladin is how smiting works. So the big thing about smite is that you no longer, smite is a bonus action spell that you do when you hit somebody with an attack.
Yeah, which I think is how people often did it anyway.
I think that's how we've seen Laura do that a few times with how she's managed some of her smites. And like, it's one of those things where the big reason why they did this is realistically to try to cap how much you are doing it. Because in many cases, by limiting it to once per turn, you can't do what I did in season 3 as Roland and do like 3 smites in one round to do over 100 damage, you know?
Yeah, they did this to stop you.
They did this to stop. Well, it's kind of funny because Matt Mercer even made a joke about this, because he made a joke about people worried about optimization. He made a comment about like a well-optimized paladin being one of the biggest threats in a fight. And there is something to that there. So like, the other reason why they made this change though is because all the other smite spells that were bonus actions to cast, now they can be activated at the same time as Divine Smite. They can be activated in the same window, that is. So now, because for a lot of people, Divine Smite, the feature in the Paladin was just strictly better than all the spells, because the other spells were concentration spells. You needed to cast them normally in anticipation of an attack and otherwise. And now it's just like, no. You hit with an attack, you can burn a spell immediately to do bonus damage of different types. And I think this is overall the right move to do, as much as it's going to annoy people, but I'm definitely someone who is like, man, smiting is such a big problem with 14, with people like crit fishing with it and otherwise, that it's just like, now it's a lot less of an issue in that respect there. So like other things that paladins get that I like is the fact they get like Find a Steed as a permanently prepared spell level 5, and some other little deals that are kind of neat. The subclasses have all been kind of cleaned up pretty heavily. A big change is that paladins have a level 9 feature called Abjure Foes, which is basically a feature that used to be exclusive to the Vengeance Paladin, and now every paladin just gets it, which is great. And in terms of the paladins that subclasses, for the most part, they feel like that they've been kind of glowed up a little bit. Pretty nice. The bonus paladin they have is the Glory Paladin, which is sort of the one that was derived from the Thanos, or the Theros book.
Yeah,
Thanos.
Balanced as all things must be.
Yeah, balanced as all things must be. But I like, again, the fact that like the different paladins have very different feels. You have the standard devotion, you have the athletic glory one, you have the nature focused ancient one, and then you have like the edgelord, like hunting down people, vengeance one. I think that's pretty cool.
Yep. I like these. I'm actually building a paladin for a later season, so I'm gonna look at these closer soon and see if there's a compelling reason to do one of these instead.
Yeah, Ranger, broadly speaking, is sort of like a middling sort of change there. Ultimately, it equates to a side grade, but that feels like a downgrade when you compare it to everyone else. The big reason for this is that Rangers are hyper-focused around Hunter's Mark as a feature. They get it for free at level 1, which is fine, but it's still a concentration spell. So anytime they have a spell that has concentration attached to it, like let's say, oh, I don't know, Summon Beast, they can't do Summon Beast and Hunter's Mark at the same time. That's just not possible. And they have some other writers that are associated with it. That being said, Ranger does get some cookies that I do like. I do like how at level 2, they get expertise, they get bonus languages. Later on, they get bonus to their speed with roving. They get more expertises. They have 3 expertises like a bard, effectively. And then they have their different subclasses, which all come with their own little ways of doing extra damage on top of that Hunter's Mark. So by the time you get to, like, I don't know, level 13, and you start losing the ability to lose concentration when taking damage on Hunter's Mark, you start having some fun synergy that stacks together, but just feels like it takes a while for it to get there. And the Ranger feels a bit unfocused as a class as a result. But that being said, Beastmaster is strictly better, way better than it was in 14.
That's all I was going to say was, like, as someone who likes to have an animal friend, they have made it much simpler, more straightforward. You now get to pick from, the stat blocks that are in this section. You don't have to go looking around.
And on top of that, those stat blocks, you can switch between them as you resummon your beast out there. They also get the ability to do bonus damage equal to your Hunter's Mark spell. They can attack twice when you guide them to attack at level 11. So now at level 11, you can attack twice, and as a bonus action, make your beast companion attack twice, so you get 4 attacks. Or you can just sub one of your attacks for their 2 attacks. So, nice. It works pretty cleanly there. One of the other subclasses we have is Fey Wanderer, which is more beguiling focus. It features another one of these cases of bonuses to other skills that you don't normally have as a ranger or something. So the Fey Wanderer, for example, gets to add their wisdom modifier to charisma checks, which I think is kind of a neat touch. And they have a little extra damage writers they can do. Gloomstalker makes a return. It is gloomy and shadow focused there. And it has a feature called Dreadful Strike, where you can just do extra psychic damage when you hit somebody. And then Hunter is just, well, it's Hunter. You want to play a Monster Hunter character, play a Hunter Ranger. It'll actually feel pretty good when it comes to that there. Especially because they have Hunter's lore, which is when you mark somebody with Hunter's Mark, you know their immunities, resistances, and vulnerabilities, just period.
I do like how that kind of does reinforce that I can't give you that information for free. People are often asking me, like, right. Austin, would it be good if I use fire on this guy? And I was like, you find out.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just something where it's just like, okay, that makes sense. Now at this point here, we still have Rogue, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard to go through. I'm not sure if you want to go through all 4 quickly, or if you wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what we're trying to do here. I mean, are we doing a guide for all the things, or just generally in the book? Because, like I say, you get the idea. They've made a lot of changes.
The biggest thing I'll mention for Rogue that's neat is the fact that as you get into higher, not only does Rogue get weapon masteries as well as Ranger and Paladins, by the way. So I think the only character that doesn't get weapon mastery that's a martial is monks. I don't think get weapon mastery. But one of the big things that rogues get that I find to be really, really nice is once you get to level 5, you get what's called Cunning Strike, where you can trade off your bonus damage dice from sneak attack to do other things like poisoning someone or tripping them or making you be able to move without provoking opportunity attacks. And then at higher levels, at level 14, you get Devious Strikes, where you can knock somebody out for 6 sneak attack dice, or daze somebody when you hit someone. And then you can and later on you can do, I believe, you could do 2 Cunning Strikes at a time at level 11. So you basically now have this ability when you do sneak attack, you also get the options to modify things as opposed to just doing more damage if you want.
Yeah, just more options. This is a theme throughout a lot of the best additions they have here. So,
they have Arcane Trickster, mostly the same. Assassin is less focused on your auto crit first attack, kill the person before the fight begins, but you have more reliable tools going on. I'm looking here real quick. I like the mimicry stuff they have in there. I think that I think that the way that they operate is a little bit cleaner. Soul Knife is just the rogue version of Psy Warrior. And it has some fun little things like the psychic blades you can do, which I'm like, cool, right? You can make psychic knives. Excellent. And then Thief, which I actually think gets some interesting upgrades. The big thing I like about Thief in particular is you get a bonus Cunning Strike option called Stealth Attack, where if you return to cover after you make your sneak attack, you do not lose the hidden condition effectively, which is kind of interesting there. And such. So like all the stuff works pretty easily, but Rogue in general is like, it gets weapon masteries and it gets other little riders and stuff. And overall, I find it to be pretty nice with how it works. So I don't have any complaints about Rogue. It's somewhere where like, if you were to play a Rogue, it would feel pretty similar to 14. It would just have a little bit of cleanliness attached to it there.
Yep, I think flattening out the assassin is probably the best thing they did there. The rest of the classes are all complicated spellcaster ones, and we're about an hour and a half. So I don't know if you want to go through these, line by line like we've been doing, or if you want to just wrap up our talk with about magic in general, because they've also reworked a bunch of spells.
Sure.
And a question I think is going to come up a lot, maybe one of the biggest things as we go forward in our show is, are we using the 2014 spell or the 2024 spell? Because they are actually factually different.
That is a big question, and I've not actually delved into as many of the spells as I would have liked just because there's so many of them, and the changes, the biggest issue with it is just going to come down to the fact that some of the things that are different about them can make them a little weird to keep track of. Just to make like one simple example here, Acid Splash. Like Acid Splash is a spell that in 14 you pick 2 targets, and then you do the I think it's an attack, or no, it's a dex save. They do the dex save. Whereas the 2024 version, you make a 5-foot radius sphere and attacks everyone that's within that sphere. So it could potentially do more, but it's just a different style and language to possibly make it more unified in some way. And one thing I will say that is kind of at least nice if you have D&D Beyond is the fact that you can look at all the spells and they have both the legacy and the new versions adjacent to each other, so it's easier to make those comparisons on spells that are like focal points. Is there any particular spell that you were thinking of that's like substantively different enough that makes you question whether you'd want to go with one versus the other?
Oh, that's a good question, because I looked through them all, but I didn't internalize them. The one that stuck out to me was Haste, which we have said a million times in the show is like the best spell, like for most levels of play. But now I think has a significant drawback. Maybe this was clever, because it's not just like, yes, you should use Haste, it's awesome. Because now when Haste ends, the person becomes incapacitated for a round because they're so sleepy, which is meaningful.
Well, it's kind of funny because, like, here's the thing. That was always the case for Haste. Because in the original version of Haste, it says, when the spell ends, the target cannot move or take actions until its next turn, as a wave of lethargy sweeps over it. But by attaching the word incapacitated to it, it makes it much more explicitly clear what the condition is because it uses an actual keyword. So this is another case where I don't think the spell is substantively changed. I just think it's better written because it's using a keyword that makes more sense. Right.
Oh yeah. I mean, I've been playing D&D in front of people for 10 years, and even I like didn't really grok that it was that big of a deal because I guess it didn't use the word.
It's one of those cases where, like, because it's sort of like a byline at the end of the spell and there's no bolding or formatting that makes it clear that this is a significant thing. This is the inverse problem with Magic the Gathering. Magic the Gathering does an extensive amount of work with its jargon and keywording, and D&D focuses so much on natural language. The difference between saying, when the spell ends, the creature can't move or take actions, to saying, when the spell ends, the target is incapacitated until its next turn, is very different. And also, I think it is a bit of a bigger debuff because now when you get out of it, you're so, like you said, you're so sort of run down. If you have concentration on the spell, it's gone. If you can't talk to anyone. So like, it's definitely a case where it's a way of making haste have a little bit more of like, it's good, but you better make sure you finish what you need to do before it goes away. And if you lose concentration on this, you're in trouble, right? You know?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely feels more significant, even if it maybe isn't factually. I will say sleep, I think, also was pretty different. I'm pulling it up now.
Yeah, I got the two versions pulled up here real quick here. So the biggest difference between Sleep Old and New is the new version is way cleaner in its language because you choose who makes the wisdom saving throw, and if they fail, they're incapacitated. It's actually kind of funny because it makes it more 4th edition like, kind of, to a certain degree. Because let's be honest, the way that Sleep worked in 5th edition was a bit of a weird thing. You rolled a pool of dice, you place your node somewhere, and then it kind of goes from lowest health upward from there. And this is just an easier reading of the spell, even though some people are like saying, well, now I don't have to worry about like if my friends are in the area. No, you don't. But the flip side is that was a wisdom saving throw, so it's not a guaranteed success if the person's at a lower pool of health. So,
yeah, this definitely feels better. If everyone found the old version, everyone I played with at least found the old version of Sleep very confusing. So this one just seems better all around.
It's actually, oh gosh, I realized this is even more like the 4th edition version because it's 2 saving throws. You do the first saving throw, and if you fail it, you're incapacitated. And if you fail the second one, you're unconscious.
So there's 10,000 little differences that people are making charts of as we speak. We don't need to go through everyone for you, listener, but you get the idea.
I did want to go over like one detail about each of the remaining spellcasters I found interesting.
Sure.
Throw your way here. So number 1 is the fact that sorcerers get this bonus thing called innate sorcery, where they can basically activate a heightened version of their spellcasting for a minute, where their save DCs go up and they get advantage on all their attack rolls. I think that's pretty neat, and they have some things that tap into that down the line. And they also get more opportunities to recover sorcery points, which is always good. The subclasses there, we have Draconic and Wild Magic, but they also added Aberrant and Clockwork. So Aberrant's kind of another almost like psionic flavor version of it, which is interesting. Warlock, they get their patron at level 3. But the big difference that's really interesting for me is the fact that the pact boons, like what you have with Miskillings, those are invocations now. You can pick those as early as level 1, and you can have more than one of them. So you can have Tome and Chain, or Blade and Tome. I think that's actually kind of an interesting choice that they went down there for Warlock that I thought was kind of cool, along with some other nice little cookies they added with how the class operates. And then for Wizard, the big thing I want to point out that I think is actually kind of neat about how they've set up is 2 things. 1, at level 2, you have Scholar, which gives you expertise in one of the knowledge skills. You can just pick one of the knowledge skills and just have expertise in it.
Yeah, expertise is now a more general term that just means double proficiency.
Correct. They actually, again, another example of them codifying the terminology in a way that's nice. But also, the subclasses, I think, are actually pretty nice overall for one simple reason. The way that the Savant ability that you get at the first level of it works. Because the way it worked in 14 was basically, it's easier for you to add spells of this school into your spell book. Now it's just like, you pick Abjurer at level 3, cool. You get 2 free Abjuration spells in your spell book. Every time you get access to a new level of spells, you get a free Abjuration spell of that level or lower in your spell book. Perfect, right? You get more spells that make you the type of spellcaster you are, and it gives you the option to choose other spells more freely without feeling like you're getting kind of too locked in. So, you know what? Good.
Yeah.
And I also do love the art they have for the Illusionist, and the Evoker is very fun. Diviner's okay, and Abjure is fine. Divination got the fewest changes between these, which is very funny, in my opinion. But overall, the Wizard stuff looks fine. I don't think people are going to be too upset with it, other than the fact that they don't get their subclass till level 3, but so does everyone else. So whatever.
Yep. I like the universal changes like that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So overall, despite the fact that I kind of breezed through some of the back end stuff, there's still plenty more we could talk about. I'd be open to doing like a follow-up thing if there was like questions or stuff that people had for us to dive deeper into. But despite us having to kind of rush through the back end of the classes, I think my overall impressions of the book here, even before we get to like feats and other things, is the fact that the book is better than I feared it was going to be.
Yeah, I was worried that it would either just be like trying to get you to buy the same book again with a couple of cosmetic changes, or just some, boring stuff I don't care about. There's a lot of books where it's like, oh, here's 20 pages of good shit and then a bunch of useless garbage I'm never going to look at again.
But at the same time, it also feels like this is what this game should have been more like 10 years ago or before now. I remember when they were even proposing offering like an errata to Ranger in 5th edition and never did it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And this does solve some of those issues, but not all of them. And I will give him at least a little bit of added credit of like having a nice, clean rules glossary area that has, here's all the rules, here's all the definitions, that you can just go to one spot and not do what we had to deal with so many fucking times of just bouncing through from page to page to find what does this condition mean, right?
I was going to say about conditions because, that used to be like its own separate chart. Also, they have changed exhaustion. It is now like a flat penalty instead of a kind of Baroque. I don't know even what you call it before.
Yeah, like now it's just for each exhaustion you have, your rolls are -2 per exhaustion, and your speed is reduced to by 5 times exhaustion. So if you have 5 exhaustion levels, your speed is 5, and you take a -10 penalty to all your checks. Congratulations.
Yep, you still die at exhaustion level 6, which is funny.
Yes. Yep. So yeah, it's overall, like I said, like if you were to ask me, Sketch, is your next character for like season 13 gonna be a 2024 character? I'm like, yeah, of course it is. There's no question. I'm just gonna do that.
Yeah, I think I might finish doing a couple characters from 2014 that I was already planning, but then like from then on out, I'll try to do 2024.
It helps that some of the classes I have not played yet in Dice Funk definitely got some nice improvements in 2024, so I get to exploit some of those as I tap into it. Artificer not included because, well, it's not here yet, but I've told other people that I have my intended goal is to have played at least one character of each class before I ever retire. Before I retire, I want to accomplish that at least.
Yeah. Oh, one more thing. Any book that mentions Planescape is a huge bonus for me, and I want to say that they have added a line to the spell Wish. If your wish would undo the multiverse, threaten the city of Sigil, or affect a Lady of Pain in any way, you see an image of her in your mind. She shakes her head, and your wish fails.
It's very good. It's very, very, very good indeed.
I love her so much. She just says, fucking knock it off.
Yeah, for sure. And at the end of the day, the last detail I was going to mention to you before we head off here is the thing I want to spend the least amount of time talking about, which is the Epic Boon feats, which is one of those things that they spent so much time playtesting, and I'm still not entirely sure what the point is, because they're really talking about this notion that you could run campaigns up to level 30, and I'm like, the only things you have to look forward to after level 20 are like epic boon feats and stuff. And some of them are kind of neat, but some of them are also just kind of like, It just kind of depends on what you're looking for out of it. Like one that's, I don't know, one that's really funny for me is the Boon of Skill, where you just gain a proficiency in all skills, period. There you go.
Yeah, that's very fun. But those people who play D&D for a different reason than me, I think.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. And like, I'm pretty sure boons is a space they might do some more work on. I would not be surprised if sometime down the line, if they actually got enough interest for it, we might see a return of something like the 4th edition Epic Destiny, which was basically like an add-on character class you picked for your level 21 to 30 adventure. Like they have the space for it now because they talk about level 30 as a concept and even map out proficiency bonuses all the way to level 30. But the question is going to be, are they going to do that? Is there enough demand for it? And I don't know. Maybe there is. We'll only find out. I think the only things I'd really want to see more of in the future are more backgrounds, subclasses, weapon mastery things to do, because the list might be a little thin. And then we kind of see what goes on from there, you know?
Yeah, I mean, my ideal release schedule is like every 6 months they release a book that is like one subclass for every class, a smattering of backgrounds, and some monster stat blocks or something. I know they don't do it like that, but that's like the Austin Yorsky product.
Well, next year we'll see what they do for their the Sword Coast book, right? Because I think the Forgotten Realms book, because they have a Forgotten Realm player's guide that's going to come out, I think, sometime next year. And that'll probably establish the stage of what their plan is for how they do these particular splat books. So we'll see.
Yep. So I think overall this was a surprisingly positive review. I was going to come in here thinking it was like, oh man, they didn't put the Artificer in here. There's barely any new spells. Fucking lazy bitches. But, you know.
And to be fair, to anyone who's complaining about this being like they're asking us to pay like X amount of dollars for basically an eroded version of the same book, there is some truth to that, but this is the same problem that we ran into from 3 to 3.5, and in this situation, the changes here do feel more substantive as a foundation than 3.5 might have been, at least to my impression. And ideally, if this is meant to act as the foundation for this next era of what D&D is, it's a better foundation than what 2014 was by good measure. Granted, that wasn't hard to do.
Get their asses. I mean, I'm cutting us off at 2 hours, but you heard there was 3 more classes we didn't even get to all the changes in, so there's clearly stuff.
If you want me on the side to do a random ramble on this stuff, let me know, and I can record something for y'all sickos out there. So don't threaten me with a good time. I'll totally do it here.
It's funny because I bet a lot of podcasts about this book are probably going to be focused on like the controversial stuff about like changing race to species, or there's a picture of someone eating a taco that people were mad about on social media.
There's a person in a wheelchair. Yeah.
It's just not like our hearts are normal. We have regular souls. So
like the people complain about the taco, just like in sushi, just like, good God, what the hell is wrong here? Like it's. On top of everything else, what fantasy adventure means is whatever you want to make it to be. So, like, if it doesn't match your reality, don't use it in your game. So just like, it's especially because this is meant to be more setting agnostic. And to a certain degree, this has done a better job of being more setting agnostic than 2014 was. Then, sure, yeah, then just do whatever you want, you know? I'm just happy that the art they have in the book looks good. A lot of those changes, especially for a lot of the martial classes, make me feel inspired about playing them and excited about it. And the lean into better usage of keywords and terms is, in my opinion, a strictly better move for something that's meant to be a rule book, you know? So...
Yep, everything makes sense, I think, or like I see what they were going for at least, and it has inspired me to make a bard. So,
and the biggest thing I'll point out is if you're planning on using these rules, read the rules glossary so you know about things that are different, like how the different action types work, how heroic inspiration works, and how conditions work and stuff. Because if you go in assuming it's going to play the same way, you're going to run into the same problem that people did when they went into 3.5, assuming it was the same as 3, or they went into 5, assuming it was going to be the same as like 3.5. So,
yeah, now, as of this recording, as of this publishing, because it's going to go up this weekend, I should say we didn't even mention that this book is available digitally, but it's not out physically until next week, right?
Yeah. I'm reading this over because I have paid the extra money to have access to this early, because I share these resources with you all like a commie, you know, like I will suffer the financial hit so my friends can have free access to fun stuff. So, you know, that's how I roll here. So, and I'll one last detail, Wizards, please. I know you did not listen to this, but fix how this is integrated in D&D Beyond, because if you go into the classes section under game rules, the classes do not list what level the features come in. anywhere. So in the book it does, and in the book section, in the sources section it does, but in the classes section it doesn't. So you go to Barbarian and you're like, oh, look at Path of Berserker, Retaliation. What level do you get it? Fuck you. I'm not going to say. So they got to fix the formatting of that there. Buckos, get on top of it.
Yeah, hopefully they're going to keep supporting that stuff, because I don't have the stats in front of me. I assume a huge portion of the player base has moved to their online tools.
Absolutely. And, and all we can do is just apply pressure to them as a company to make sure that they make the product as good as it can, because, as someone who was a really big fan of D&D Insider for 4th edition, which was an amazing set of tools, when that stuff disappeared, it was like crushing. And so people putting pressure to make sure that 5th edition 2014 version stuff is kept on there and to make the tools better is good. I don't blame the developers on the platform. They're probably being run through the shitter in terms of like just how much pressure is put on them. But at the same time, it's just like, we got to put pressure on WotC and Hasbro as an organization to do as well as it can, because it's the biggest game in town, has the most money. It should be doing the best in town. And if it's not, that's a failing on their part.
So release date September 17th. So that's 9 days after this episode will be published. And then the week after this episode comes out, we're getting to the final dry arc. So
yes.
White the Storm Giant is coming back to Banyan Island. I know how it ends, and let me tell you, it's fucking pulse pounding, nail biting. It's intense.
My gosh. You will not want to miss it. And if there's anything that we did not go over in this podcast due to time constraints, you can always at me on the Dice Funk Discord, and I will answer you. Again, don't threaten me with a good time. I will always happily answer stuff like this, because I will just geek out about it for hours on end, as Austin knows.
Thank you for joining us. I'm sure we'll be back the next time a big book comes out. We're always looking for stuff to talk about, so maybe a smaller RPG, or maybe they get new monster manuals worth talking about. Who knows?
But we'll see you next time,